You know, when we're in the middle of difficult situations, it's usually hard to remember and realize that we'll be better people for the difficulties we've had. Without the trials, it'd be impossible to develop the strong character we admire. We understand that somehow or another with physical exercise. We uh, we understand that you got to have the gym membership and you got to get out and walk 30 minutes every day and you've got to lift weights and you've got to do all those things. But we fail to understand that it is those other trials in life that test our character beyond the physical, that actually make us better people. No great person has ever had it easy. He had to come through trials. In James 1, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into divers temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. The hardships we face in life, whatever they are, the disasters, the sickness, the difficulties, the deaths, the sicknesses, they can do one of two things. They can either make us better or they can totally defeat us. And so as you face them and as I face them, we need to think about that. We've got two choices. It's either going to make me better and stronger and wiser as I get through this, or it's going to destroy me. Consider such a man who was tried much, but he succeeded in a greatness. Look with me in Genesis, the 12th chapter. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. There was a woman here years ago who had come here from West Virginia. She and a couple of family members, they still are in this area, still Christians. But she was having a hard time. She had been uprooted, moved away from her home in the mountains, all of her family, all of whom were Christians. And she'd been dumped over here in Indianapolis. Flat land, the wind blows all the time. And she said, it's so much harder. She said, when all your family's there and they're all at church with you and they're all encouraging you and they're all expecting you to be there, it's just sort of automatic. But when your family's not there and you're sort of alone and you go to church and there's not many people you really know, she said, it's harder. Well, look at Abraham. Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. God pulled all the support, family support, cultural support away from him. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I'll bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Do you suppose he moved him into an area where he had to change the very language he spoke? Boy, I've heard a lot of you Spanish folks trying to move Mexico up here and think we're going to speak Spanish up here in the good old US of A forever. And I've heard of others who tried to hang on to their Polish or their Romanian or I don't think even my Welch family held on to it. They even changed their name when they got here. They couldn't pronounce it, probably. It was a hardship. I'll make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Now I want you to look at Genesis 22, because there's a test here. And it's an interesting test on a number of different levels. God tested Abraham's faith. He said, take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, rose up and went into the place of which God had told him. Then on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. Abraham said unto his young men, abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, my father. And he said, here am I, my son. He said, behold the fire and the wood, and where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. They came to a place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. The angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here am I. He said, lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. Do you have that sort of faith? He was tested. But you know, that's not the only time he was tested. We just talked about it. He had been away from his family and tested for 100 years. He'd been alone. He left Ur of the Chaldees and lived in Haran for a while, and then God said, you get out of Haran. There's too much of your family there. And so for 100 years, he had been wandering. He had difficulties with his workers in Genesis, the 13th chapter. That was the herdsmen of Lot, the herdsmen of Abraham got in a fuss with one another, and he had to sort out that family problem. My goodness, what are we going to do? Lot, you pick the best land, and I'll take the stuff that isn't quite as good. Do you think that happened easy? You don't think that involved a lot of grief and head scratching and worrying and maybe some tears, as these men who were the last family he had, this man who was the last family he's had, separated from him. These men he's been with all of his life up to this date were separated. Had to be a test. And lo and behold, Lot and his family are captured. What are you going to do? You can't just stand by. There was no police to call. He arranged allies and an army and went after them. Fought a battle and brought them back. Do you think that happens easy? You know, you watch those little hour-long shows on TV where stuff like that happens. It looks easy. Just grab the big guns and go off. Those other guys, their automatic weapons always miss. And the good guys have got some little pistol that won't go through tissue paper, and they always shoot the bad guys. It's amazing. You think it's easy? You know, it had to involve a lot of planning, a lot of sword fighting, hand to hand, in order to get him back. A lot of travel. But you know, he had plans. He had a child, Ishmael, by Hagar. They'd planned this. And he loved the child. And that failed. That child wasn't a day old or a month old or a week old. He'd grown up. And he had to be sent away. Don't you think that might have been something of a test? He had problems with his wife, had problems with his children. He saw others in the family fail. He was there looking down at Sodom and Gomorrah as it burned when the angels told him what they were going to do. Don't you think he was worried about Lot and his family down there in that city exploding? Facing imminent death. He had to trust other people. Boy, that's hard. You know? Trust me, I know. I'm sort of in a business with my sons, and I'm getting older. I can't do it all. I have to trust those two rascals. And my wife's been preaching to me over and over again about how I'm a micromanager and I've got to quit. I got to quit micromanaging. I think, that's a pot calling the kettle black. But anyway, you got to trust some other people sometime that they can handle it. That had to be a trial and a test. He had to trust his servant. He sent a servant out to find a wife for Isaac. He was tested over and over again. The amazing thing when God says, you go kill your son, is he didn't argue. I believe I would have said, could you say that one more time, Lord? I'd like to have that in writing, please. Are you sure about this? You sure, maybe I couldn't take one of the servants or 4 or 5 sheep? He didn't argue. There's no record that he raised any objection to what God told him. He could have made a lot of good points. This is my only son. This is the one you promised me. He could have said, it was a miracle that this guy was born. Sarah was 100 years old. I'm older. You promised. I've got it in writing that you promised me this child. But Abraham did not mention one of those things. It's an amazing thing. He didn't mention them. Instead, he had this goofy notion. It's recorded over in Hebrews 11. He says, by faith, in verse 17, by faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac. And he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. The writer of Hebrews thought he had a good argument, but Abraham never said it. Accounting, and why didn't he? Well, he accounted that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead. He said, I'll kill him, but God made the promise, and so I reckon he can raise him from the dead. Didn't mention any of that. Didn't argue. There's a lot of people these days who argue with God. They just argue with God constantly. The commands in the Bible are really simple. They're simple. That whole idea of repentance, that's really pretty simple. Kind of tough to do, but it's simple to understand. The whole idea of baptism, Well, that's simple. The Bible's pretty clear about it. The whole idea of the relationship in marriage. He made a man and a woman. And he said these two would be man and wife. That was pretty simple, wasn't it? Doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure that out, or a rocket scientist. And he said that they would be married for life. He said that if you married someone that was guilty of fornication, that you'd commit adultery. He said there wasn't any reason for you to leave your wife except on the basis of fornication. That's really simple to understand. There's nothing hard about it. But a lot of people argue with God. They hear the simple commands and they don't like them. There it is, baptism and then worship. You know, the Bible just doesn't say anything about worshiping God with an instrument of music. It's just not there. So that a lot of people argue with God about it. Should we worship? Should we come to church? Is this hard to figure out? You know, I've had a lot of people tell me, say, well, I don't see too well. You know, we got a lot of old people here. I don't see too well after dark. Okay, I understand that. So why aren't you here tonight? I mean, it's not going to be dark till 9 o'clock. We'll all be home and gone by then. We'll be ensconced eating a BLT at the house and watching TV by dark. So why aren't you here? Can you not grasp the simple idea of gathering to worship? Or giving. Why in the world do we have to preach on giving and being general, being a liberal giver? Well, he didn't argue with God. You know, every command in the Bible is really a test. Every one of them is a test of our faith. We sometimes think of baptism. We figured out that that's a test. Are you willing to submit to God? Well, every other one is the same thing. Either we have enough faith to just obey because God said it, or we don't. Now, what God told Abraham to do really was fairly simple, wasn't it? It didn't take any mental giant to understand what he said. Now, the question was, here it is, what are you going to do? In 1 Peter 5, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. Let him do the worrying, you just do the obeying. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, is a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Whom resist steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. How does your faith stand up to that? Will you just obey? Because it says it. But in addition, he was prompt. You know, we do run a business, and we got several workers who just on Monday morning, they just have a hard time coming to work. Somehow or other, Monday mornings, there's sickness, and they don't have a babysitter, or their car just doesn't work, or they're hungover. Actually, I think that's really more prominent than the other excuses, but they don't voice that very often. Abraham rose up early in the morning. He didn't go, oh man, I got the most disgusting thing to do that God could ever ask me to do. I'm going to dither around and wait. Along about, 3 o'clock this afternoon, I'll finally get around to it. My wife and I are gotten to be such homebodies that if we're going on a trip, it's kind of like the angels had to lead Lot out of Sodom. They had to take him by the hand and say, get out, it's time. He was dithering around in the house. And I have to almost do that with my wife. Hey, we've got to be down there in an hour. Get out of here. Because there's always my wife's nickname. My wife has a nickname. I'm not sure she knows what it is, but her nickname is just one more thing. It's kind of 3 or 4 words. There's always just one more thing. Well, that was Lot, but it wasn't Abraham. He got up early in the morning, saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering. He got out early and got to work splitting wood, and rose up and went into the place of which God had told him early. You know, it's hard to get up for even things we like to do. I used to every now and then go fishing, and some of those idiot fishermen will get out there right at dawn. I'm going, you know, it's still going to be water and the fish are still going to be in it long about 10 o'clock, right after a nice, tasty breakfast. And I've had my bath and gotten everything ready. Or, Bill, a game of golf, one of those early morning games. It's hard to get up for those. You sure? We got what, at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock tea time? You know, they do have tea times at 10 and 11, don't they? Couldn't we wait just a little bit? He didn't procrastinate. It would have really been easy to do that. A lot of Christians do. They put it off. But he was prompt to obey. The single most dangerous thing that Christians can do is to put it off. In James 4, whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. Ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that, but now you rejoice in your boastings. Oh, we're going to do this. Well, when? All such rejoicing is evil. Therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it's sin. Get with it. You know what needs to be done. It's time to do it. Just put it off. Quit worrying. There's a lot of Christians, or a lot of people who are waiting to obey. They just keep putting it off. Somehow it's easy to just stuff it off, and finally they get disgusted. And you find they don't even come to church anymore. But he was determined. In Genesis 24:22, on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. Said unto the young men, abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder. He had a long time to think about this. You know, when you got a disgusting job and you make them remind, I'm going to do it, it's better done if you just do it right then. My wife and I, we got a bunch of chickens. Pretty soon, I'm going to be giving away eggs. Block your cards or you're getting eggs. But I got too many chickens. But we're picking out chicks this spring. You go to, where would you go? Rural King. We went to Rural King, and they had a bunch of this breed of chicks, little white chicks. And somebody had mixed a couple of strangers in there. And they were called giants. That's the name of the breed. They're as big as a small turkey. Well, when you expect a little chicken, and after about 2 weeks, you're going, my goodness, I've got baby Huey on my hands here. That chicken's too big to walk. Gloria had to start helping the poor thing in and out of the hen house. And finally, one of our workers, Gloria, rose early in the morning and said, Alfredo, that chicken needs to be in the pot. I'm not going to lift him in and out of the hen house all of his life. And so I think it made a meal for about 12 Mexicans over there after a while. So, but if you had a chance to think about it, you look, oh, the poor little baby Huey, we've raised him. I don't really want to do that. You're better off just saying, hey, it's time to kill this chicken. Well, Abraham had 3 days to travel and think about what he had to do. It takes a determination to keep it on. At any moment, he could have turned around. At any moment, he said, this is nuts. But he didn't do any of that. Did you ever, in biology class, I don't know, this may be a million years ago, but did you ever have to test your blood, see what blood type you are? And there you had to do. The teacher gave you a pen, hopefully that was not used by several HIV students before you, and said, here, prick your finger and put it on the microscopic slide. Did you ever have to do that? Does anybody do that anymore? What are you people studying biology these days? You probably don't have any idea what your blood type is. And I forgot. But anyway, there you sit and you know, this is going to hurt. This is going to hurt. I'm not really excited about doing this. And you kind of wait and wait and wait. You think, well, I'll close my eyes, but you might miss your finger and hit a vein. Who knows? So finally you did it. Remember the time, I can remember these boys, first time they went to the doctor and they got a shot. Actually, the first time is not too bad. The second time, where they know what's coming, is awful. They want to put it off. Can we wait here on this? Our life is not easy as Christians, but it's worth it. 1 Corinthians 15:58 we looked at this morning. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast. Abraham was determined, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. For as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord, he had learned that lesson. And the Lord tested his faith. Let us not be weary in Galatians, the 6th chapter. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Well, finally, you remember reading here in Genesis 22, he passed the test. He had the knife out, his son tied up, and he was ready to drop the knife. And the angel stopped him. He passed the test. It was enough. God said, now I know that you wouldn't even withhold your son from me. And he finished. In our life as Christians, a whole lot of people start and don't finish. We have to be willing to go all the way. I hope God blesses you with a long life. But after that long life, it doesn't get easier. It gets harder. And you begin to question yourself, your determination. He finished. It's not enough to start. I'm now ready to be offered. Paul said, the time of my departure is at hand. I fought a good fight. I've finished my course. I've kept the faith. Henceforth there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but also unto them that do love his appearing. In Revelation 2, fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that you may be tried. Ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I'll give thee the crown of life. Just starting won't work. You're going to need to be faithful unto death. That's one of the travesties of that once saved, always saved doctrine that says that if I just had faith back there sometime, I can't be lost, no matter what I do from then on. What in the world does that mean when it says be faithful unto death? It doesn't matter whether I'm faithful or not. Matthew 10, ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. He that endureth to the end shall be saved. No, I was saved back in 1983. And that was enough. I can do anything I want after that. Finally, tonight, Abraham's example lives on and encourages us to live as we should. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac. He that received the promises offered up his only begotten son. Abraham would have died 1,000 times before he'd give up that son. He was asked to give him up, and he gave him. Of whom it is said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. In James 2, was not Abraham our father justified by works when he had offered up Isaac his son upon the altar? Seest thou how faith wrought with his works, and by works was faith made perfect? The scripture was fulfilled which saith, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness. And he was called the friend of God. You see then how that by works a man is justified, not by faith only. Are you a friend of God? Willing to do whatever he says. We sing a song every now and then. It says, we're ready to suffer grief or pain. You're ready to suffer old age? You were thinking there'd be some other more noble thing that you could do in the Lord's service other than get old and sick. How strong is your faith? Are you determined so that you can endure to the end? If you're here this evening and not a Christian, before you can finish, there has to be a start. If you're here this evening and not a Christian, or if you're here this evening and not certain that you're a Christian, you've been hanging around religion for a while now. It's time to be certain, time to be sure. Come while we stand and sing.